Great, thanks, Ben. And I just really appreciate you all joining me on this. We had no clue as to how many attendees we'd have, so I think that this is just fantastic too. I think Ben said there are 17 people on, and more importantly, we're going to record this for everyone else. So even if some of you did attend my talk up at Reno, this is actually great that we're able to have this group. And so I can get people like Walt Rogers, who was presenting, I think, or attending other sessions, to be able to give feedback and be on this session. So what I'd like to talk about here is wave cross country, which is a focus and passion of mine, and actually to cover more of what you can do outside of the Eastern Sierras. I got a little bit of feedback. Is that from you, Ben? Because I think everyone else muted. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I heard feedback and now I don't. So
okay. Anyway, we're rolling. So quick agenda. I just want to give you a bit of context here, because actually what we're going to talk about is not just the wave cross country. It's more like how this fits into a larger picture. We'll actually talk about the tasks and, of course, the weather, a few words on equipment, and then, of course, Q&A. You can, and as Ben said, you can ask questions during the call itself, or you can wait till the end. So just a quick bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I've been flying since I was 14, pretty much all in the Bay Area here in California, although I've flown in about 6 different countries overseas, Australia, New Zealand, and Austria, and a few others. Right now, I am on my 3rd glider in my life. I am a partner in Phoenix, an ASH 25, and I've been a partner for about 15 years. When I first bought the share in 2008, I actually bought it from Rex, who had restored this. I was more interested in the performance increase because I'd moved from ASH 26. So this is probably about a 10% performance increase. But within a year or two, I really found I really enjoy mentoring other pilots and flying from the back seat while others are in the front seat. And we go along and we both learn, and I show them different ways that you can do cross country, but also, more importantly, to actually exercise the decision-making muscle. And I have a completely separate talk for that, which actually I'm going to do with Dan Colton later this week, talking about how do you build up your endurance, okay? Because I really like doing 10, 11-hour or longer flights. And I think it's fantastic, but I guess that's what some people say about marathons. Other people, it kind of wears them out, and it wears me out too, but in a good way. So, but that's a separate topic, talking about longer flights. I've flown with about 120 pilots over the last 15 years, and it's just been really enjoyable. You know, there's hardly one that I wouldn't fly with again. It's just been a wonderful experience. As of note, one of my other partners is Danny Schaefer, who runs the shop at Williams, and I feel like I'm one of the luckiest glider pilot owners to have Danny as a partner. You know, he just has all kinds of great advice and knowledge about structures and instruments and all kinds of things. It's been wonderful. So I'm based in Williams, been based there for at least 17, 18 years or so. In my biased opinion, it's the best glider port in this country. Great culture, great people. Obviously got a repair shop there, and Rex and Noel and the entire Mays family have just been so supportive of what I've been doing. It's been fantastic. I've also been flying, though, from other places, Avanol and Truckee. In fact, that previous picture where I showed the picture of the glider was out of Truckee this past summer. My first time flying Phoenix out of Truckee. So the bigger context here is what's really driving me. And wave cross country to me is just fascinating, and it's so unexplored, and there's not a lot of people doing it. It's just, to me, really compelling and captivating. I've flown in the Sierras and done a lot of thermal long cross countries, and it's interesting and fascinating, but it's not the same as wave cross country, but there are very few people doing it. I feel fortunate that there is another pilot who thinks the same, and that's our good friend Rami, who has probably pair flown with me on at least a dozen wave cross countries. And it's fantastic to have somebody like him who thinks like I do and is open to some crazy tasks and ideas. But he's also very efficient and very effective working wave cross country flights where we either go up towards Eureka or down to the Bay Area and back. It has just been a joy to have Rami along. And he calls me on, if he thinks something's too crazy or whatnot, and I listen to him most of the time. So, but that if you have somebody who is kind of like your flight and task planning buddy, that's really important. So, but why are we doing all this? To me, I'm not a contest guy. I mean, contests are great, and I've been in several, and you learn a lot there, but that's not what gets me going every season. To me, what's most important for me is I want to do these flights that when I am on my rocking chair and I can't fly anymore, that I just think back and I'm, who knows, maybe Rami or somebody else is sitting next to me and I go, God, wasn't that just an amazing flight? I just can't believe we did that. And so to me, this is what drives me. I want to have those incredible, memorable flights. They may or may not be records, but that you go through and you think, God, that was just so amazing. I can't believe that we did that. Even now, I've been flying for almost 50 years, or flying gliders for 50 years. There are some flights, many flights, where I feel the same way. I'm like, this is so amazing. And especially as we all get older, to have that feeling of thrill and wonder, to me, is this, I just feel so lucky to have that. And I think a lot of you feel that way too. One of the things I do find, though, with us soaring pilots is that we're not thinking big enough. Yes, 1,000 kilometers is a big flight, but if you are edging up to 1,000K, you should be looking at 1,250 or 1,500, or maybe even longer. I mean, something to really stretch you. People, I don't think, in soaring think big enough on that. And this talk is not about just to show what I've been doing. It's more of an example of this is how I'm applying this to myself, and you can do it too. Maybe you can't last 10 hours. That's okay if you can only last 5 or 6 hours, but what can you do in those 5 or 6 hours? You could easily do a 750, on a really good day. And that is my message here. We'll go into the technicals and the flights and all that stuff, but really it's all about pushing yourself, doing these memorable flights for yourself so that you look back and go, God, that was just amazing. Okay. I hope you all think that way too, because that to me is what drives me. Okay, so back to wave. So when people think of cross-country wave, they think mostly of the Sierras. And I've flown 5 or 6 years in the Sierras and cross-country wave, did my 1,000-mile up there, and it's amazing and fantastic, but it's essentially a one-dimensional railroad track, right? Because wave doesn't move under the same wind conditions and stability. It really doesn't move. Maybe moves, a few hundred meters this way or a few hundred meters that way, maybe a mile. But it doesn't allow you to really go any places other than the backside of the Sierra. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you've never flown the Sierra wave on the east side, it is just amazing. You got huge stacks of Lennies and, you're bombing along at red line and the ground's just going by like, nothing. Fabulous. Everyone should do that. But after like 5 or 6 years, I kind of got bored with it. So I'm like, okay, fine. It is spectacular, but it's the same railroad track. What else can we do? So most of you have seen this wave mechanics graphic or something similar to it. And, I studied these like a lot of people have. And one of the things that I came to the conclusion is that there are different ways that the air works in a wave-ish manner that until you start trying different locations, because this Eastern Sierra wave is very classic, right? Air comes down, kicks up, it's continuous, got a big Lenny there, got huge rotor. It's classic, just like by the book, fabulous. But when you start going off into other places like a peak or maybe a short ridge, and then you got to transition to another ridge, that becomes a different animal. One of the things that I have found lately is that under the right circumstances, which happen more often than not, is that you can have a very light wind, and the wind here is coming from left to right. The air does go down, but it only goes down a little bit, and then it comes right back up. And so you're climbing in this wave, and it feels like you're almost on top of the ridge, and the wind is very light. And I see more and more of this, partially, I guess, because I'm looking for it. But the big advantage, if you can work and find this kind of situation, is it not only allows you to fly in different conditions, lighter winds than you'd expect, but also you don't have to deal with the crosswind if you're going, from one point to another cross left to right when the wind is coming straight at you. This leads me then to one of my number one rules in cross-country soaring or cross-country wave soaring, especially in the Sierras, is ABC, always be crabbing. That is the number one issue I found when I'm flying with other pilots, is that because of our thermal flying, you want to point where you're going. You can't do that when you're going, across the wind. If the wind's coming this way, but the ridge is like this, right? Which you want because that's how wave forms. But you got to be crabbing, and it can be anywhere from 5 to 20 degrees, and it's easy to miss that, and all of a sudden, poof, you're too far downwind, and then that can be trouble to recover from.
Hey, Kempton, one
Yes.
question time. When you talk about relatively light winds and that bounce, just as a number metric, what are you talking about? Kind of lighter winds than you would expect?
That's a very good question. So the winds in this graphic here, or in general, I used to think, 60, 65 knots at 18,000 feet in the Sierras, that was a good number, because if you go more than 60, 65 knots at 18,000, you then have to crab too much. And then when you start getting to 90 to 100, you cannot hardly go anywhere. I also find that the wave does not bounce as much. It's almost like, to me, the analog is if you have a garden hose and you have, one of those guns on the garden hose, if you stream that out so fast, it doesn't have time to wave. It just goes straight, okay? On the low end side, low to me would be 40 to 45 knots. I've seen this wave, this low wind wave happen as little as about 40 knots or so, maybe even slightly less than that. And at first, when you encounter, you think this is not possible. But I've been in enough of these where you're like, oh my God, I'm going up 4 to 5 knots over the Mendocinos and running down the line. I am right on top of the ridge. The risk is it's exactly like an airfoil right at stall. You go a couple of knots slower and then the whole thing breaks apart. Or if the thermals start interrupting it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on that, Walt, but that's been my observation.
Yeah, I get my only experience when you're talking about Goat Mountain, for example. Out there, I've been in like 15, 20 knots, and you go find that smooth air, and you go, okay, this is wave. You're not looking for it, but that 15 knots is where you're ending up right on top of the ridge like you were talking about. But it's hard to go anywhere else because usually it's just that single bounce you got.
Right. Yeah, it's not systemic. Although when I get to the reverse Sierra wave, that was more systemic. So, but that's a good question. To me, the number I look for at 18,000 feet, 500 millibars is around 50 knots or so. Because like I said, you can go up to about 60 or so and you're still not having to compensate much for the crosswind. But when you start going above 60, then you do the vector math and you're really starting to lose a lot of speed, trying to point your nose into the wind to keep your track along the ridge. Good question. All right. So let's talk about for what I feel are some of my tasks here. For me to be able to do 1,000K or longer flight from different locations is what I'm really interested in. So what do you need for that? You need what I would call trustable lift. The cool thing about Wave, it's very repeatable in the same locations. And we have this database of wave points all up and down the California coast. One, for example, I discovered one right over Noss Field at Novato in a 020 wind. There's another one right over Petaluma Airport, slightly to the east. And so these are all repeatable locations in places that you wouldn't, think about it. But when we stumble upon these, we note them. And so we've been building out this database of both point wave sources as well as the typical ones along the ridge. You want them to be closely spaced. Obviously, going upwind or downwind, going upwind can be what I would call a death dive. And if you've ever flown with me or anyone who's done an upwind transition in Wave, you got to be ready. Okay, here we're going to burn off 7,000 feet. We're going to plunge from 18,000 to 11,000 because we need to get about 20 miles upwind. It's rather dramatic. And, until you're done one, you think you're just going to hit the ground. But you get used to it after a while, but it is still fairly dramatic. Once you get more than about 20 miles away, going upwind 15 miles, then it becomes, really problematic to try to connect those. So you want to have them as closely spaced as possible. And then you want to have, for those sections of a ridge, and again, we're not talking about the Sierras per se here, but up and down the coastline, to be able to have some ridge line that runs, a decent length, 20, 30, 40 miles, whatever you can get away with. When you go from about Hoopa, which is northeast of Eureka, down to about the Yolo Mountain, that's a fairly straight ridge of about 50 miles or so. And that over here on the right, what happened to my cursor? Oops. Can you see this red cursor here, Ben? I'm out in the ocean right now underneath the wave. Okay. Anyway, so towards this top here, like between the words wave and XC, this is that ridge I was talking about. And you can see by the drainage patterns here that I can't remember the name of that ridge, but those drainage patterns are part of the Eel River. So this is a fairly straight section. So when we have either a prefrontal southwesterly wind or a offshore northeast wind, this ridge works very nicely. And so you have a whole assortment of ridges all the way down to the Bay Area and even down the coast all the way to Santa Ynez. So it's basically, the goal is to string together and get data points for all of those ridges. Okay, so let's go over the 4 tasks that I have for myself set for this season and beyond if I don't make them. It was said once, if you publicly make your goals known, then you have your social group to help reinforce that and keep asking you kind of like, well, what are you going to do? Fill in the blank. So that's how I feel I'm doing right now. So 2 of these here are straight outs. The one from Williams to San Diego and the one from Williams to Yuma. And then the other 2, Lake Orville and the Avanol ones, those are closed loop ones that come back to that point. Okay, so let's take a look at these and what the setup is. So the first one is the straight out to approximately Oceanside. I just say San Diego because not everyone knows where Oceanside is. So this would be on an offshore wind wave day. So about 030, 040 would be ideal. And we can actually start by going up. You can see the red star is Williams. We would actually fly in the wave up to about Hoopa at the top of this arrow, and then come back the same route, hop to St. Helena wave, down the Napa Ridge wave. Mount Diablo is right here. Fremont is right about here. Probably go to the Santa Cruz wave. Then there's a small one at Watsonville, then to the Big Sur wave. This wave here can be very strong as you get the offshore flow because you have quite a nice and smooth drop off here. One of the things that I look for, I've been doing this enough now that what I look for as a qualifier, especially when you're going into a place where you've never flown before, what is the visual cue for what could be a good wave source? And that is a nice, smooth backside drop. And so you don't have any interruptions, or you just want to let that air come smoothly down the backside of a ridge. Goat Ridge is like that. This ridge up to the north is like that. Big Sur is like that. Santa Cruz is like that to a degree. So that's what I've learned in terms of, when I go someplace I've never been to before, it's like, okay, what do I look for? Now, of course, you can always find wave in the middle of nowhere out in the flats. I mean, that's the case with the Noss Valley wave and some of the other ones in the Sonoma Valley too. But again, I was in that case, I was kind of forced to go there, and then I just stumbled upon them. So what's great about this is that the other thing about wave cross country is that you can use the full day, right? You don't have to wait for the ground to get hot and for clouds to start popping. So you're constrained the other way though by the wave season usually ends around late April or so. So basically when we're entering that time now, from basically about now to late April is the sweet spot there, because the days are long enough, but the ground hasn't gotten hot enough yet. And then you don't have the instability messing up the wave. This would have a partial tailwind the whole way, and there's no clouds. Now, most of the literature would show in classic wave, like the picture I showed of the Sierras, you'd have a big lenticular and all that stuff to market, and that's great. But Rami and I have found that in order to go long distances, almost all the time on a prefrontal wave situation, the cloud gets in the way. Either you have a rain wall coming or underneath you gets totally socked in. And we both have come to the conclusion after doing this for about 7 or 8 years, it's like, I just would rather have no clouds. And we just know where these points are mostly, and we'll go with that. Occasionally you get a little shred of something, but we don't count on that. And the other point here is that it would be repeatable. So if it doesn't work one time, we'll try it again. In this case, to be able to fly down to Oceanside, which is down here north of San Diego, this would involve getting high here at Santa Paula and then taking the tailwind, crossing out over the ocean, ideally tagging Catalina, and then head into Oceanside. So, of course, when I shared this with my co-pilots, there was, silence, which I understand, but you think of Catalina as your safety airport, yeah, it'd be a heck of a difficult retrieve. And I don't even know if the boats can take trailers out there, but people have landed out there a couple times and gotten aero retrieves back. It would be arduous, it'd be expensive, but you could do it, and you're not going to become shark bait. Although one of my co-pilots, there was apparently some seminar up at the Vacaville airport for ocean ditching procedures, one pilot's experience. And he said, I think we should go to that. Well, okay. I didn't wind up going to it. They didn't have a Zoom session, but the point is that it would look bad, but it's actually with a 40-knot tailwind, it's not really that difficult at all. I've done the math on it. It's quite doable. So the weather setup for this is a 700 millibar chart. So you can see this is a very strong offshore flow. This is 30 knots, 35 knots here right north of the Bay Area. And this happens when you have the cutoff low. You see this big red L here? That's a cutoff low. And when you have a cutoff low with a high pressure above it, you get this gearing effect. And that is what makes for this strong, relatively consistent flow offshore, which then triggers the wave. So this setup doesn't happen very often. And further, those low pressure, these cutoff lows, they are small meteorologic objects. And what does that mean? Well, from a practical standpoint, it means they're easily pushed around, and therefore the forecast, usually we don't get very much confidence in the forecast until like 48 hours or less ahead of time, because they can vary quite a bit. Now, you don't have to have the high pressure above it there, but it certainly does help. I've flown in offshore wind conditions from a cutoff low, and there was no high up there. In fact, that's the setup we'll go over in a moment with the reverse Sierra wave. So the precedent for this is what Rami did last January. We were watching for this kind of setup. In fact, that last graphic was the setup on that day. He launched out of Williams, rode that from Goat, went north to about Ruth. He didn't quite make it up to Hoopa, but to Ruth, turned around, came down. He's flown enough in this area. He knows where all the hot spots are. This one hot spot here, that's St. Helena, came down the Napa Ridge, climbed at the Mount Diablo, worked Santa Cruz Range down to Big Sur, and then worked his way down to San Luis Obispo. This area here is a little weak, and he got a little low at San Luis Obispo, I think about 9,000 feet, and then was able to get a small climb here over Lopez Lake, came down and worked the wave in the Santa Ynez area, but couldn't connect with a stronger climb there. But just strictly as a proving that this could be done kind of flight, it was fantastic. Other people have flown from Santa Ynez in the wave, including Rami one time actually, all the way out here to the Quail Lake Grapevine wave, and down here towards Ventura. So we know this all can be done. You just have to do it all in one day. Okay. So that's what we're looking forward to do. The season for these cutoff lows, usually I don't see these much happening past mid to late April. I mean, by then things are getting too hot, too warm, and the thermals are kicking off. Plus, I found that at least SkySight, once we're in this shoulder season rolling from winter to summer, it can be a little optimistic on wave projections in Southern California. Maybe it's not taking into account the heating of the ground, from especially since we've had a drought, although not now. I'm not sure. I'll cover that more in a moment. Any questions or comments on this flight, this task? No? Okay. All right, so the second one. This is the reverse Sierra wave flow, and this would be a 1,000K task from Lake Oroville down to Lake Isabella and back. Many times, in fact, if we go back this from Rami's flight down the Coast Range, you can see all of this on the west side of the Sierras, all this forecast wave lift. But no one, as far as I know, has ever flown this. It's very continuous. You don't need a lot of strength, so long as you have 3 knots and it's continuous. I mean, that's really all you need. So we've seen this on the maps for years, but no one's ever really tried it. And so there's several challenges to this. Is that first off, it hasn't been flown, so nobody really can confirm that it's actually there. It would require a long tow because Williams is on the west side of the Central Valley, and we'd have to tow into the foothills on the east side. But it does have the possibility for a 1,000K flight. So I've done 4 tows from Williams up into the Sierras for various thermal and wave situations. So in this case, this was February 12th. And so we saw this day coming, and this is the forecast for that day. Again, a cutoff low down here generating the offshore flow. But you can see it's not very strong. This is actually at 500 millibars. And it's only like 40 knots in the north and even less so in the south, like 25 to 30 knots. And yet the forecast was saying it was going to work. So I'm looking at this going, but at some point, somebody's got to try this thing. So I decided, you know what, we're just going to give it a go and then see what happens. The good news is we were upwind. And so if it didn't work out, you can just bail out and either land in the Central Valley or make it back to Williams. So that was February 12th. This is the forecast from that day from SkySight. You can see it's kind of weak in the north and it gets stronger as you go south here. These little black dots here, because I did not have an LX9000, although I'm getting one installed, to be able to map and put the data wave forecast onto the navigation map, I had my co-pilot, David Maruzzi, put some of these waypoints in because I use Navigator on my iPhone. As my flight computer. I'm in the back seat. We have a ClearNav in the front seat, which is great, but that's in the front seat. In the back seat, I just have steam gauges and my iPhone, and that's the way I've been flying for decades. So we're looking at this going, okay, then this way we can navigate ourselves down here. Oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know, on the iPhone CU Navigator, it doesn't cache the entire day's wave or any forecast there. You have to be in cell phone contact. Apparently that is coming, that they can cache it all there, but it wasn't there in time for this flight. So we just put a bunch of points out there and David would just steer me to those as we were going along. So, okay, that's great. So we're excited to do this. But the forecast was saying, well, the wind weakened a little bit. And so now you're going to need a 13,000 foot tow. And I do 10,000 foot tows regularly just to get into the wave, sometimes when it's very weak. And I'm thinking, the Pawnees can't get to 10,000 feet, because there's the ADS-B regulations that, above 10,000 feet. So I'm thinking, this is the day before we're going to launch. And Nick Mays just very casually said to me, well, I've always thought about putting the tow hook on the 180. I think we should just do that. So, that has ADS-B and, powerful engine and rudder trim and all these other things to be able to, take it up to altitude. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that would be so great. It would be a mini egret. For those of you who don't recall the Perlan 2, they had a similar problem. They needed to be towed to 60,000 feet, to enter the wave above the tropopause. And so basically, short story, they brought in a plane from Europe called the Egret, which had a turboprop engine and could get them up to 60,000 feet. Well, I don't need 60,000 feet, 13,000 feet would be fine. So we waited until the next morning and Nick had done it and it was fantastic, took off, and we towed over to Lake Isabella. So this is a flight trace that's posted on OLC. And basically, we're able to work this all the way down to South Yosemite. So this is how it looked that morning. The ship was ready to go. There were some hints of lenticulars on the west side of the Sierras, but by the time the sun came up and we got over there, they had disappeared. So here we are getting ready. Drew Pierce was helping out, and it was great to have, as always, the Williams crew being very supportive. And so we launched at, I think, about 8:15. And this is David, who took a shot from the front seat. Now at this point, we're about 2 minutes or so away from release. That's Nick in the 180 in front of us, and we're east of Lake Oroville. And the lift wasn't strong. It was like, it was forecast to only be 1 or 2 knots, which is kind of difficult to sense when you're climbing, but it was enough that we could tell that there was something there. So we released and then headed on south, hitting our waypoints. This picture was taken just about entering the north part of the Desolation Wilderness. Off to the forward left here, that's Lake Tahoe and Desolation Wilderness. Some of the peaks, if you've ever hiked in that area, that's right here straight in front of us. Now the wind is coming from about the center of Lake Tahoe at us. So that's, you notice we're not pointing into the wind because of course we want to keep on traveling south. But again, this is part of the crabbing I was talking about. As you can imagine, there was nobody flying that day. So we were the only ones up in a glider. Okay. So we continued further south, and this is a short video that David shot. When the ground is covered by a lot of snow, the visual cues aren't that great. So we then spot this man-made feature.
A lot of times, my theory is that it's just like water. The water runs into the canyon and it kicks up just like a flood. You see how they come down canyon and they hit the rock in the middle of the canyon? Yeah, that's exactly.
So this in the middle of the screen is the Bear Valley parking lot. And as we're heading south, if you've ever been to Bear Valley, it's on the edge of a large valley, which is what we're circling over right now. The reason we're circling is because we were in like 3 knots or so. And again, we're being very cautious on this because we've never done this before. But the wind was so light that we could circle in this and we wouldn't get blown downwind that much. And because it was wave, it was fairly broad. But David was the one who spotted this. And he goes, "What's that?" And I go, I think that's Bear Valley. If you've ever been there, there's skiing below and above the parking lot here. And I mean, this parking lot was just packed. Oops, sorry. Let's go back. Okay. I just wanted to finish this up here.
My theory is that it's just like water. The water runs into the canyon and it kicks up just like a flood. You see how they come down canyon and they hit the rock in the middle of the.
So that was me talking there. The reason what I was explaining to David was that we were over the middle of this large ravine valley, if you will, but because it was pointing almost directly into the wind and there was like a higher part up the valley in front of us. If you think of water coming down, if you were to pour water all over the Sierras, obviously it would go into the ravines. Well, that tends to speed up the air. And if there's a drop in elevation somewhere in that ravine, that would induce a wave. And we are right over that point that had all those characteristics.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think we're in. It's not predicted because it's a very small thing, but it can produce high lift rates. Looking for that nugget. I just want to find one good employee. I don't need a million. Look, there's nothing. You can do it. You're such a good dog.
Hey, Kempton, all that lift is very beautifully produced on both those clear nav variometers there, aren't they?
Yeah, no, it was very helpful to have that. Yeah, and as we go on, to me, a lot of when you're flying in a new area, in a new situation, is to get a feel for things. And when you look at the forecast and when you look at where we're in, the areas of lift were broad. I mean, it was not, this small thing, like if you get behind a peak or something like that. So yeah, it was very helpful to have that. And you can see right there, the wind, it's 26 knots from 047. I mean, that's nothing. So, and for those of you who listen to the audio, I find it's very helpful for me and for the thing I'm talking to. If I talk to Wi-Fi units and printers and lift sources like they're a dog, they tend to behave better. So that's what I'm doing there. One of my own oddities, but I find it works for me.
Kempton, Walt Rogers here. I just posted the folder where I had the satellite photo on your flight track on that day. It's in the chat.
Oh, okay. Great. Thanks, Walt. For those of you, this will be recorded, but I don't think the chat is captured. So for those of you interested in that, why don't you click on that? And that way you have that link after this presentation goes away. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll also try and copy and paste it. Maybe we can post it in the description on the video later.
Oh, okay, that's great. So we continue further south, and when I saw Half Dome, this is maybe like 20 miles before this point, I go, that's Half Dome. David says, that's not Half Dome. I go, that's Half Dome. I've never flown over this, the deep Sierra like this, ever, at this altitude. So it's like, oh my God, it obviously looks so different than when you're flying it over during the summertime. But it's just spectacular to have these natural objects that are just so big, that you're just recognizing from miles away, and you get closer to it, you're going, oh my God, that's amazing. So, I mean, as you can imagine, the whole visuals on this flight were just fantastic, trying to take it all in, fly the plane, figure out the weather, and keep going. So at this point, we pretty much, the forecast was showing that I should continue towards the upper left here, like basically in the direction over the wing, further down the Sierras. We start going that direction from here, and then we hit sink. And so after what, 2-3 minutes, we turn around, come back to this point, get a climb, and this is up like 110 or so. And I was thinking we probably want to turn around 130 or so. In retrospect, I should have kept on going, much further. But I'm thinking, my experience again in trying to pioneer new areas is like, okay, we hit the sink there, but let's go, in this case, downwind of that sink area, and maybe we'll hit some lift. So at this point, then we go basically almost right across Half Dome, heading south. And sure enough, we hit a lift line, and we keep going for about 15-20 more miles. And then we hit this. Just like in the Eastern Sierra, there can be extremely strong lift. And we're seeing, 4, 5, 6 knots. Oh, that's great. 7, 8, 9 knots. And then I can see if we don't do something about this in a moment, we're going to blow through 18,000 feet. So I push the nose down, heading into the wind, and basically take it up to red line, and, to try to at least flatten our climb. And as you can see there, we got over 18 knots registered. And look at that wind, 0.075 at 36 knots, nothing. Well, when you look at the flight trace at this moment, we came under the 18,000 foot ceiling by 27 feet. So it was a little close, but we didn't bust it. And at that point, I'm thinking, okay, well, I should have gone further south, but I decided, I want to see if we can get to Lassen, because that was the other end of what was forecast. But it actually weakened when we got further north. Next time, we're going to push all the way to Lake Isabella's. So, but it was just spectacular and very heartening to find not only continuous lift, but there can be these pockets of very strong lift. So this is a short video that David shot out of the window. If you look over to the right here, so now we're heading back north after our little 18 knot encounter there. And if you look here, whoops, I don't have my marker on there. If you could mark that, Ben. But over on the left, that waterfall is Yosemite Falls. And it was just the most amazing thing to see the water, coming down off of the rock, from 17,000 feet. That was just amazing. So we got back north, we messed around a bit at our original release point, couldn't find anything else there, and realized basically that was pretty much, we're done for the day. So we headed back to Williams and landed there. at a quite civilized time. I'm used to getting back at sunset, but I think we got back maybe like an hour and a half before sunset or something like that. So fantastic flight. I just was really excited to prove out that that actually works. That's David Maruzzi on the right. David is a Williams pilot. He has an ASW 27. And so a little comment on what I call my bench. I have 3 pilots who I've flown with over the years, and they form my bench, if you will, for being co-pilot on these long wave flights. And that would be David, Drew Pierce, some of you know him from running Hollister, and Michael DeMeyer, who's with the NCSA. These 3 gentlemen have proven that they can last long for these flights. They're good sticks, they're good strategists, they think about what's going on, and they rotate between whether they're the co-pilot or driving on the ground for crew. And they just are really, really hearty pilots to be able to do this. And they have a great sense of adventure. So that was just a little bit about that. So got to pick your co-pilots carefully, because obviously you don't want somebody who's, has aversions to long flights or is a little bit more fearful than you want. Okay, on to the other tasks. So this task here is a straight out from Williams to Yuma, Arizona. This would be probably on a post-frontal day, and it would use the full day, and I'll explain that in a moment. It would have a tailwind, and it's unique because, actually I should change this. It would be a day where you start off in wave, because at the extreme north part of this arrow up here, there's a little ridge west of Redding, and in a north-northwest wind, there's a wave off of this ridge. And I've been there twice in it, and I've proven it exists. So I call it the Buckhorn wave, because the highest peak here is called Buckhorn Peak. So you could tow from Williams over to here, and then I actually flew in wave along the range here up to this for the final climb. But I could easily just tow up here, get your release and start maybe about 6,000 feet or so, climb up to 18,000. And then, because it would be about a 340 wind, you just drift downwind till about 11:30 or so, when you'd be in the Delta area and now getting into the convective layer. So because it's a post-frontal day, the valley would then be starting to pop with cumulus, and you just, with a 15-knot tailwind, 20-knot tailwind at altitude, 4,000 to 8,000 foot bases, continue just drifting with the wind down to what I call the grapevine wave. So this ridge here produces a very reliable wave.
Kempton?
Yes.
Sorry, I got to run out. We just had something happen in town. But Dennis is going to finish moderating for me, and then he'll end the recording when it's done.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. So if we climb here and then be able to work some of the wave off of the San Bernardino ranges and possibly San Jacinto, then you can continue to coast downwind to Yuma. So it'd be about 703 miles, could actually be a little bit more than that. The current record for straight out for 2-seaters free distance is 701 miles. So that's kind of been my benchmark there. This wave, this is a satellite picture. You can see the Lennies off of that range, what I call the grapevine wave. And you can see the cumulus around here. This is actually a little bit of a dry day. I've seen days where this entire San Joaquin Valley is populated with cumulus. And it's interesting, as you come south, there's a bit of a Venturi effect occurring as the valley narrows there, to actually squirt out a much faster than forecast wind across this area. And there's actually been numerous, if you look up NTSB reports, there's actually been quite a number of power plane crashes here, because people flying from LA wanting to go north, they just follow I-5, and then they don't realize that how tremendously strong the sink can be on the backside of this. So the precedent for this is what Rami had done back in 2009, and actually even before this, Brian Choate, who has since returned to New Zealand, he's the one who actually started us thinking in this way when he got the wave at the Grapevine here, climbed up to 18,000 feet and landed at Bermuda Dunes, which is down here. And so at that time, it was the longest flight straight out from Hollister. And so Rami did this flight, which still stands as the longest straight out from Hollister, in April. So again, the same kind of time frame where we have the front still coming through, and you still have these valley days, but it's not so hot that it kills off the lift in the Central Valley. So he did a Hollister launch. The links are here for anyone who, I'll put these in the chat. Actually, we'll put them in the notes with this. He did a whole video and written write-up about it. It was quite a fantastic flight. The weather on that day, you can see the cloud base here. It gets higher as you go south. He actually was seeing almost 9,000 feet down here at the south end of the San Joaquin Valley, which makes sense because it gets hotter as you go south. But even this day, it would have been, this also supports my starting up here in the Buckhorn Ridge area, because you would overfly a lot of this early stuff anyway, and then get down into where the cumulus are starting here in the south of the Delta area. The boundary layer wind that day also supports that there would be wave here, and most particularly wave down here at the Grapevine, in the Grapevine area. And then when you head further southeast of this would also support, which he found too, wave off of the San Bernardinos. And his final climb was right here, right actually on top of Mount San Jacinto to under 18,000, then for the downwind run to Yuma. So what's exciting to me about this whole setup is that this actually right now, March 24th, which is what, that's like 12 days from now or so. I look at the long range forecast 16 days out. Of course, when you get that far out, I mean, it can vary wildly, but oftentimes I see what the mood of the weather is going to be able to say, okay, yeah, I know it's 12 days out, but it's possible that something like this setup would happen on that day. And this is 700 millibars. So you see right about here, which is where the Buckhorn wave would be. Okay, yep, the wind is going in the right direction. Need about 20 to 30 knots. Looks like it'd be about 30 knots at 11,000 feet. Go straight down the valley here. The Grapevine wave is right about here. Yeah, you'd see about 35 knots or so. When I look at the 700 millibars, usually you want to see at least 25 knots or so there. And my metric is, 50 knots, 45 knots at 18,000 feet, 500 millibars, 25 knots, 20 knots at 700 millibars, and usually 15 knots or so at ridgeline, which is around 850 millibars. So who knows? We'll have to watch and see what happens, but it is possible. The last one is the Avanol to Yakumba and back flight. So this one I actually attempted last April, launching out of Avanol. And the thinking here would be head north. This is a prefrontal wind setup. So the Tembla range, which are these lines here, this is actually the forecast from that day, would set up with wave. You could possibly make your way north towards the furthest north turn around Los Banos, head down south along the wave, make the transition here to the north side, lee side of the San Bernardinos, come here and then come down the San Jacinto range, possibly even hitting Yakumba, and then work your way back. When you do these kind of flights where you're coming back like we did with the Lake Oroville to Lake Isabella, typically the return leg is faster, and that is because you now know where the lift is, right? Because you were kind of confirming it on your way out. But if you're coming back along the same route, then not only do you know where it is, and unless the wind has radically changed, and usually it's going to be there, but also towards the end of the day, of course, you can burn off your altitude as you come into your final airport or landing spot. So, what was interesting about this day is that this forecast failed spectacularly. It was not at all like this. And that's where I'm thinking, I think it didn't take into account what a drought it was, and it disturbed this pattern. I mean, we got wave initially, but as soon as I started heading south here, it pretty much broke apart, and I wound up landing out at Shafter, where Josh Nerr, thankfully, Drew was crew, and he alerted Josh to my predicament, and Josh has a Pawnee, he got that out, and I just landed. We didn't even get out of the cockpit. He just pulls in front of us, and we're off the ground in like 7 minutes. So it was fantastic. My co-pilot that day was David McMaster, and so we took a tow back out to Taft, released there, worked a little bit of wave there, but it was not at all nearly as strong as forecast. So anyway, but to me, this flight, if we could do this, would just be awesome to be able to cover a lot of new ground and yet make it back to, close to Avanol. So the preceding flight for this that gives me confidence this can be done is that actually I did a flight in Morgan Hall and I in January of 3 years ago, did that running up and down the Temblers. And then my flight of last year, and then Morgan and Zach since have flown along this route and even gone over to the Sierras from this. So again, there's a lot more to be explored in cross-country wave. We just have to get it all together on one day, and hopefully the weather gods, support us. Any other thoughts or comments on the tasks? No? Okay. So let's talk about equipment here for a brief moment. So I use these Savior gloves here, these battery powered gloves. They're actually originally made for motorcyclists, so they're broadly available, and you can get extra batteries for that. In the sock department, this top black sock is also a Savior sock, and its battery is interchangeable with the Savior gloves. But you can see that this is the smallest of the 3 batteries here, and in fact, it will only run for about 3 hours at full power before it's depleted. So I'd use this on some other flights, but we found that especially for the front seat pilot, you need something that lasts. And the reason it's more of an issue for the front seat pilot is because the nose is much narrower up there. And so to try to reach down to try to swap the batteries out is a real problem. So Drew did the research, Drew Pierce, and we came up with these other 2 socks. What's the name of these? Grab this here. It's these Vice Plus. I'll put this in the, I don't know if you can, does it focus on it? Doesn't. Oh, there we go. Vice Plus, that's the middle battery powered sock there. And then these Wasotos, this is the bottom sock. Okay. So, and that white battery is a battery that Drew got to have even more power. But the other key with this is to have these extension cords. So you'll notice the top sock, the Savior sock, has your typical circular plug-in, when what we really need is a micro USB plug-in, because that's what the other 2 socks use. That way you can plug them into any battery. So with that plug there, you use those red and black cords as extension cords to be able to take that up to you. And so you can swap batteries to just keep the battery, to keep the sock going all the time. In addition, the middle sock, the Vice Plus one, it actually has an app that you can control from your phone, your heating of your toes. The modern era just makes us say sentences that you never thought you'd say, like, oh, I have to upgrade my app to heat my feet. So, but that's modern life. We've used these on that reverse Sierra Wave, and they work really well. I mean, even for me in the back seat, even though I can get down and grab and swap batteries on my socks, it was really nice to have the ability to just have it right. I didn't have to reach down to change the batteries. So highly recommend these, the Vice Plus and the Wasotos. If you only go for shorter wave flights, then the Savior ones would be perfectly fine. My other comment is on oxygen. So we all know oxygen is important and all, and we should be using it more often. But one of the things that I didn't know 2 things. One, last year I flew with a guest co-pilot who will remain nameless at Williams. And we did a thermal flight up to the Scott Valley area and back, nothing high. In fact, we wanted to be higher, but we never really got above 11,000 feet. Well, on the way back, we had been on some oxygen, and then I get the alarm that, the oxygen is out. And I'm looking, I checked that, and it had like 500 pounds. Well, it turns out that on the EDS regulator that I had, it cuts off at about 350 or 400 pounds. It won't let you use that last part of the pressure in the bottle. It turns out there are what's called a 2-stage regulator, and that's what's illustrated in this product sheet, where it'll allow you to take it down to like 10 PSI. So basically, you get to use the whole dang bottle. And for a lot of times for me, I got 2 big bottles in the 25. I want to be able to have that choice so that I don't have to basically throw away a third of the bottle because I can't, use the pressure. I can't use the oxygen in it. So if you become really serious about this and you want to do those, 10, 11-hour flights, you might consider getting this 2-stage regulator. I mean, it just gives so much more option. Or the other way to think about it is it gives you like a 25% boost. If you're going from 1,800 pounds down to 400 pounds, and then that's it, that's all you can use. Well, now you can use pretty much all of those 400 pounds, pretty much almost down to zero. Okay. So that's another way to think about it. The other thing is, continuing the story with the tow pilot. So we're flying back and the oxygen dies, but we're only at like 10,500 feet. So shouldn't be a problem. Well, he was starting to get woozy and basically all of these, oxygen deprivation signals. I'm thinking, well, we're at 10,000 feet. Well, it turns out he did not drink at all. And it turns out that hydration, we've all been told, keep your brain working, hydrate, pee a lot, but that is also coupled to oxygen delivery. And so when we landed, the paramedics were there, they hydrated him and he felt much better. I didn't know that in order to keep your oxygen level up, you need to be hydrated to use that to get the oxygen to your cells. So if there's one thing you learn from this talk is, just make sure you're hydrating not only for, just regular, so your mouth isn't dry, but it also helps your oxygenation. Okay. So more references on this. I wrote an article last year about cross-country wave, at least in the California area. So I refer you to that for more weather charts and information. And just a reminder, so fly big before you can't. I saw a phrase a couple of days ago. It said, it's not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing dreams. So you go out there and you get your soaring dream, because that's what I'm doing. And I hope everyone else can do the same for themselves. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's Russ. How long do those larger batteries last on the socks?
So let's go back there till we make sure we talk about the right battery. So I was using the middle sock with the extension cords with the black battery in the middle. And that battery, I think it was a 10 amp hour battery. I had to swap it at about the 9-hour mark, 8-hour mark. And it had been, I think, in 3/4 power mode. So basically, for up to 8 hours, that one battery should be good, maybe 7 hours if at full power, but I had an extra battery set with me.
Great,
This black battery here in the middle is, where's my cursor? So this one here in the middle has twice the capacity of the Savior battery. I think this is a 2.3. I think this was a 5 amp hour. And this white battery is a 10 amp hour battery.
Okay, another question, Kemp.
Yes.
Yeah, I missed a lot of this. I came late. So you're recording it. When is it going to be available and how do I see the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, Ben, well, after this, we're going to stop the recording and then Ben will post this probably within, 24 hours or so. So yeah,
okay, great.
It'll be available.
Thank you.
Glad you could make it.
Yeah, me too.
Other questions or comments? Let me see anything else in the chat. Oh, you already put that in there. Okay.
Question? Captain, question?
I can barely hear somebody.
Yeah, what sort of an oxygen mask do you use?
Oh, it's just a standard EDS cannula.
Have you thought about using a full face mask?
That's only useful, if you plan to go up to Walt, help me here. I think it's like 40,000 feet or 35,000 feet. I have absolutely no interest in going above 18,000 feet. I mean, maybe if I fly with Gordon someday and he can only go to 26,000 feet. And even then you still have some decent margin if the oxygen fails. But when you start going above that, in my opinion, that is really risky there to go above the mid-20s in terms of it's such a small margin, but in case your oxygen fails.
I agree with Kempton. This is Walt Rogers. Yeah, cannula is fine. You just have to make sure the person you're flying with and yourself that you're breathing through your nose.
Right. And that's a very good point, because as the backseat mentor, I am talking a lot. When I'm talking, I'm not breathing through my nose, and my EDS regularly alarms me, and so reminds me to breathe through my nose. Other questions or comments?
So, Rush,
business became interesting to me as a waiter when I was a kid, if I can.
No other questions or comments? Okay, well, we will be posting this on the VSA YouTube channel, and I hope to see you all up at the glider port at some point. Thank you very much for attending. And oh, a quick plug for, I'm going to be on with Dan Colton. I don't even think he's even announced this yet, but I'll announce it here. So he has a regular Thursday NCSA call to go over weather and things like that. And so I was going to hop on to that and just talk about how do you build up your endurance and how do you think about that? Because we talk a lot about, when you think about distance flying, it's V times T, right? Velocity times time equals distance. We spend a lot of time on the V, right? That's thermaling techniques and, faster to the next climb and all that stuff. But we don't talk much about the T. How do you make yourself, keep up that decision-making pace? How do you make sure that you're sharp? How do you practice that? And there's not a lot of, nearly as much discussion about that. So I have some ideas on that. And so we'll cover that. Again, you can look that up in the NCSA Google forum for it. I don't know when the time is.
Yeah, Kempton, this is Walt Rogers. One comment. My longest ever flight done in thermals out of Cal City for the Beer and Hilton Cup, a big triangle, 960 kilometers. I saw that day coming 4 days out. So I just want to emphasize the importance of having the situational awareness of the weather well ahead of time. And inevitably, as you look at the details from 4 or 5, 6 days out to getting in closer, you'll see today it's looking better, tomorrow it's looking worse. It's not uncommon as you get closer that you find some little detail that doesn't work right. And I'm thinking that more in the thermal category, summer soaring in the east of the Sierras. But you get disturbed by some little detail that's not perfect. Don't worry about it. If it's the overall pattern is good, there's always enough uncertainty in the weather forecast that if it's generally a good pattern, you should just go for it, because you never know how much longer you're going to have to wait for a good pattern.
I completely echo that. Thank you, Walt. Because for those of you who don't know or seen Walt or Dan give talks on weather, you think of a forecast as a funnel. And so think about how much variance, goes one way or the other. But as you get closer, it starts coming in, and there may be a little something that doesn't quite fit right. And that I didn't discuss this on that reverse Sierra wave flight, but that's exactly the case, that we were seeing the wind speeds like 3 days beforehand started dropping. And then the day before, I had the 24 hours before the actual launch time, it looked kind of crappy. And then the next rev, 6 hours later, all of a sudden the wind speed jumped 10 knots, and that changed everything. But just exactly like Walt said, don't get hung up on that. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, this setup's looking pretty good, but if something goes off, that doesn't mean that you just throw it out the window.
Yeah,
soaring is not an exact science, or weather is not an exact science. And I've seen enough of those cases. They often come back in your favor, not always, but often enough that's kind of like, I'm not going to throw this all out because I've got prepared for it, and we're going to give it a go anyway. But you just have to be prepared for that variance.
Yeah, Kempton, I'll just add to that. In the thermal season, in the summer monsoon season, what will happen is it's all looking great, and then the last 24 hours, that morning, you see a middle cloud altocumulus layer come in, or cirrus layer, and it doesn't cover the entire task, but you're psychologically, you go, oh my God, this is never going to work out. It's just too much clouds blocking the sun. Don't sweat it. Oftentimes, those layers are thin, and you can get through it without too much trouble. So again, don't be dissuaded by these little minor variations that don't look perfect for your flight. Just get ready to go, give it a go, unless you see something really obvious that's going south that morning for
like a fire,
your task.
Some sudden unforeseen thing, the smoke, obviously. But yeah, absolutely. Because it's a statistic, it's a probability game. You know, if you keep showing up, if 1 out of 5 times it truly, 1 out of 8 times it truly doesn't work, but then you had the other 7 that did work, and they worked spectacularly, so that you did have that very memorable flight. Because it's the other point I want to make on that. To me, I want to avoid soaring regret. You know, because the super days, they don't come around that often. That's why they're called super days. And if you miss one and you go, oh, God, you know, I should have done this or that, I can think of a couple. I only have a couple, but they were quite spectacular. So
the ones that brought regret to me was a family obligation for a big trip coming up on the perfect day.
of course,
Not much we can do about that,
right.
except get disowned by our family.
Well, or you could take the Rami approach. I don't know if he's on the call or not, but you know, he stated this publicly. He goes, you can go soaring every day, except perhaps even your wedding day, and even that is negotiable. Okay. All right, folks. Well, appreciate the time. Any other questions? You can just shoot me a question, note on the Williams forum or any of the other forums, Hollister or NorCal, and I will respond or call me.